Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Navigating Trump 2.0. This, of course, is the show that takes a look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. through the lens of this second Donald Trump administration. And boy, what a humdinger of a week we had this week. Joining me to help unpack it and break it all down, CBN News chief political analyst David Brody and the host of the CBN podcast Quick Start, Dan Andros. Gentlemen, tariffs are at the top of the news cycle once again. Will we ever start off a show talking about anything else? Let me say that again.
Yeah.
The Trump administration rescinding the Liberation Day tariffs that were put into place last week, at least on every country not named China. But now we're hearing negotiations are going to be taking place between the Trump administration and as many as 75 countries, the Trump administration has said. Officials say, David, that this was all part of a master plan, right? This is kind of like the long game that Donald Trump was playing, a very art of the deal type situation. While Trump himself, an hour later, said that he was doing this because the markets were, quote, a little bit yippy and that people were afraid. In other words, the market reaction seemed to be driving his decision, at least according to what he had to say, differing a little bit from what we heard from the Treasury Secretary and the White House press secretary a couple hours beforehand. David, does the reason matter why Donald Trump decided to reverse, at least for 90 days, these tariffs that he had put in place last week?
Well, I want to address all of that, but I'm still stuck on the fact that you used the word humdinger, which I'm impressed with.
I'm an old soul, David.
That's good stuff. And then we heard yippee as well. I mean, so honestly, welcome to 1974, everybody. And this is Trump. What is it? Navigating Trump 2.0, but it's more like, on steroids. I mean, this stuff is just wild. So what was your question? Just kidding. Okay, I know. Yeah, look, this is apparently all part of the master plan. And I think we're getting a master class in the art of the deal. Now, a lot of people will be jaded about that, saying, oh, he caved. No, he didn't cave. How did he cave? Explain to me how he caved. Now, he would cave if he said, you know what? Never mind about these tariffs. We'll just go back to business as usual. That would be one thing. That'd be obviously a cave. In this case, he's not caving. He's pausing the tariffs and waiting to get those better deals that will come America's way. And that's part of the art of the deal. I mean, I think it's a masterclass. I really do. I mean, and I think that was the point all along. Everybody talked about American manufacturing and all that. It's all true. And that may be the kind of like the ultimate goal of where he wants to go. But they also understand that ultimately they had to kind of level the playing field. And this is a way to do it. The tariffs have always been a tool in the toolbox, right? But if you don't use the tool, then womp womp, it just sits in the toolbox and no one cares. But if you get out the electric drill or you get out the saw and you start sawing, which is what Trump did for, 48 hours, then countries out there are going to be like, oh, can I say this word? Oh, crap. He's serious. And that is the key. You got to use the tool. And he did. And he did it for 48 hours. And back to the yippee part of it. Yeah, absolutely. Folks were getting a bit yippee for sure. And so was the calculus as well, this idea that they've got to kind of watch out as it relates to where the stock market was going. Sure, that was a concern. But here's the good news. That would have been a concern at some point anyhow. It just maybe happened pretty fast for them. But I think the ultimate plan was to pause these tariffs and get everybody back to the negotiating table. And in the process, they've isolated China. They made China out to be the big bad wolf in all of this. And I mean, there's so much of, 4-dimensional chess, 9-dimensional chess, 11.5-dimensional chess. I mean, John, this has just been, I think, pretty good by Trump. We'll see what the final result is, but I think we're seeing the art of the deal play out in real time.
Dan, do you agree with that assessment?
I mean, I'm not a huge fan of tariffs. I'm kind of more of in the old school, the Thomas Sowell sort of way of thinking that this is essentially a tax. But I think, John, what we're sort of seeing going on here is I think there's a few things sort of going on with the tariffs at the same time, and a lot of it's getting conflated. And so there's what Trump says, there's what Trump does. And then there's what many of his most sort of ardent supporters, these influencers online, say about what Trump says and does. So, like David said, Trump's been a longtime proponent of tariffs. I think there's a clip of him back in like 1988 or something on Oprah talking about China ripping us off. And so he's been on this train for a long time. This is not new for him. This is consistent for him. And now that he's in his last term as president, he's going all in, and he's like, you know what, I'm doing, I think he said, what no other president would do. And so here's where it gets sticky. I think conservatives and Republicans have sort of long been opposed to tariffs generally because, like I was saying, they're essentially a tax, and conservatives aren't generally fans of taxes. They're not fans of government interfering with things like the free market and free trade. But then you have people online sort of trying to contort themselves and saying, okay, here's the narrative that this makes sense from our view and our political view on things. And I realize that there's a changing tide, right? Like conservatives, populists, there's things happening there. So it's not all the same thing as for conservatives as kind of maybe as unifying as it used to be. But all these changes are happening pretty rapidly. And so there's a newness of the narrative that people are trying to like find for themselves. And so then Trump's been consistent on this thing, but then you have people trying to explain it all. And I think he gets sort of lumped into that. I mean, I think I saw one commentator, one influencer saying the other day when the market dropped the first time, they said, hey, losing money, it's no big deal, guys. It's just digital zeros and ones. Like it's for the good of the country. You just got to suck it up, Buttercup, get used to it. And then when the pause happened and the market spiked, the same person's on there going, oh, see, he all along he had it. Now, it may have been Trump's plan all along, but I think what's happening is the people out there are trying to make arguments for these things, and then they end up having to flip themselves around because they're contradicting themselves within a 24-hour period. But yeah, so I think some of that's going on. I mean, like David said, I mean, there's a lot going on here. And so, it's difficult to kind of sum it all up in a short segment.
John, even the major anti-tariff Rand Paul acknowledged that if it's being used by Trump as kind of a negotiating ploy to kind of level the playing field, then he's all for that. He didn't think that would happen, and we'll still find out if it does. But I think we have to distinguish between the use of tariffs as a negotiating tool in the toolbox and tariffs as a long-term strategy circa 1900. Like we're not in America. We're not in that America today. So to Dan's point, if there are certain conservatives that are saying, yeah, I'm all for tariffs. Oh, now I'm against tariffs. Now I'm for tariffs because they're trying to, fit Trump's, whim here and there. Yeah, that's a problem. But I think there's two camps. Like I said, I think there's the camp that says, even the Ted Cruz's and other are like, look, if you're going to use this for a negotiating tactic, great. If you're going to do this as a long-term strategy and just say, forget about it, we're going all protectionist and we're going all isolationist economically, then they've got problems with it. At least that's the truth serum inside the Republican caucus. So I think we just need to distinguish between the two. And right now, John, at least, it appears that Trump is doing what I thought he would do all along, which is go ahead and use the tool and then dial it back to get a better deal ultimately, which will produce more revenue and maybe not be the American manufacturing boom that he promised, but at least it'll be marching it down the field some, like kind of a middle ground.
Yeah, and I'll just say too, Dave, just throw in there that I guess if that's part of the deal and the art of the deal, I guess he can't say that's what he's doing, right? Or else then everybody will know that. But the problem with that is then, he's going out on Truth Social and just announcing these policies, and like businesses are going to have real ramifications from these things because especially smaller businesses, they need time to adjust. Like, okay, it's going to be all my shipping and exports. Like I saw one guy who has a small business and he imports a bunch of stuff. I think he said about $26,000 in tariffs he was paying. And then when it switched, all of a sudden he was going to have to be paying like $300,000 or $400,000 in tariffs. And it's like, wait a minute, he's going to have to shut all that down. And so people are going to have to plan for these things. So he can't just be like constantly tweeting out these numbers and just changing it and not expect the markets to react poorly because, I think the market would settle if they knew, okay, here's going to be the lay of the land for the time being going forward. I don't think that's the problem is necessarily the tariff policy in and of itself. It's the lack of uncertainty of what he's actually doing that I think causes all this volatility. So I think it'd be nice if some of that got ironed out a little bit and it wasn't so the markets are just waiting to see what Trump tweets next.
Yeah, John, I'm sorry. I just real quick. I understand what you're saying, but in the art of the deal, he talks about flexibility being key. Now, people are calling this chaos, right? People are calling this, helter skelter, and who knows? But this is part of the art of the deal. Now, people might not like it. Folks that are about to retire with their 401k got that. That's the danger. That's politically the danger for Trump. But this is his mantra. This is what, when you read Art of the Deal, he talks about you have to have flexibility. So people will call it chaos and instability. He calls it flexibility. Once again, I think Trump ultimately knows he has the cards here. Back to my GDP is bigger than your GDP. You need us more than we need you. And I think ultimately he knows that. So I guess we'll see.
I guess one of the things we are really going to see is whether or not how well the art of the deal applies to government, how well the art of the deal applies to the executive branch. And I think that's what this process has been all about, whether it's the Russia-Ukraine negotiations, whether it's hostage negotiations with Gaza, whether it's tariffs, whether it's, whatever it happens to be. It seems as though President Trump and everything that he's laying out here does have an art of the deal feel to it. And you kind of say what you need to say in order to get the best deal you can. Sometimes I think that just means you're going to say one thing and then say something completely different the next day. And it seems as though a lot of his inner circle is left in the dark in terms of what the president might be doing. And it might not be planned. The president might have 2 days ago decided, I'm not changing, I'm not doing anything different, and then wakes up one morning and decides, okay, let's do a 90-day pause because all these countries are coming in and they're saying they want to negotiate. The markets are also rattled. So like to Dan's point, you had people making reasons for why the Trump team was doing this and why Donald Trump was engaging in these tariffs in the first place, and then now that they've been taken off, it's an art of the deal thing. So I can understand, like, if you're on the inner circle and you've been trying to sell this, it affects the credibility of the people who you're asking to go out and sell this, and which I think is a little different than when you're doing it in the business world, where it's cutthroat and dog eat dog, and everybody kind of understands the nature of play here. And I guess my next question, kind of leading from that into the American worker here, is that one of the things that we had been told was that the reason these tariffs were going into place was because Donald Trump wanted to reshape the U.S. economy. He wanted us to manufacture more things, stop outsourcing everything that we do, bring more things into the country, get businesses to start building plants, doing all these things inside the United States to benefit the American worker. So Dan, if these tariffs get reduced or taken out of place, and the president even said today that he would be, or there's a report today that the president would be willing to work with some larger companies to do carve-outs or workarounds around some of these tariffs. If some of these things get pulled back, what does that mean for the American worker? What does that mean for middle America, who was looking at these tariffs? They were in support of these tariffs, thinking, we're going to start making things in the United States again. We're going to be building plants again in the United States. If these tariffs go away, businesses, other countries, they won't have a need to do that at that point.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of what I'm talking about. Like, you have to settle into letting people know what your actual plan is, because as far as the narrative goes, I don't think you can have it both ways. Either we're supposed to suck it up and take our short-term losses for the supposed long-term gain that these tariffs will, yield, which is what Trump says, that, hey, like it'll build back up our manufacturing base. It'll, all the things he says that these tariffs would do in the long term, but, understanding that there would be this short-term period where there's adjustment and there's a downturn, but then saying like, well, it's just a negotiating tool. Well, I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too on that. And again, I think that's where the conflation I was talking about earlier, you have people trying to argue as these things are changing. But I'm interested to hear what you think, David, but I think that's a narrative issue for Trump, because, whether it's caused by the followers or not, I think that those two things seem to grind against each other.
Well, I'm not an economist, obviously, though I play one on television. No, I actually don't. I don't play one on television now that I think about it. To your point, Dan, the White House will have to be clearer as to, how they both work together. And I say, what's both work together? This idea that you're going to negotiate deals, but it's still going to be good for the American worker. Sure, they have to be clear on that. But I can tell you this, that well, to me, once again, I'm not an economist, but it doesn't seem to me like they're going to, finish all of this and come out and go, well, yeah, sorry, this doesn't quite work out for the American worker. They're going to spin it somehow, some way, or it'll be reality either way, where lower tariffs, whether that be that, for example, Vietnam or South Korea or the EU or whatever the level playing field is, will be better for the American worker. I think it remains to be seen what the final details of all of this are. Sure. And then at that point, you'll get Bessent and others coming out saying, okay, so, the playing field has changed. We've got, less tariffs coming in on X, Y, just whatever their numbers are. And then they have to explain how that's going to help the American manufacturing industry. I do want to take a bit of issue with something, John, you said earlier about the inner circle. You said something about, not that they were thrown under the bus, but they basically were left in the dark, I think is what you said. I'm not quite sure where you're seeing that exactly. They've always been very consistent that this was part of, trying to level the playing field. And if pausing the tariffs and trying to renegotiate deals is leveling the playing field, which it is, I'm not sure how that's inconsistent from what they've been saying. I mean, I don't think it's Trump waking up in the morning and saying, this is what we're doing. And, oh, by the way, Scott Bessent, I haven't talked to you at all. I think his inner circle is very familiar, for whether it be Navarro or Lutnick or Bessent or others. I mean, that's his inner circle, at least on this issue. And to me, I think they've been fully briefed on all of this. I mean, I don't think this is Trump just willy-nilly just keeping his inner circle in the dark.
Well, that may be true. It's just the thing you notice is Carolyn Levitt and Bessent saying one thing about the tariffs one day, and then the next day, once it's been reversed, talking about the art of the deal and all of that. And you're right, they may have been a part of that. The reporting also has been that the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, when he was before a House committee on Wednesday, just as this news was breaking, was caught unawares of the president's plan to reduce tariffs. When it was posted on Truth Social, he had reportedly told lawmakers that he wasn't aware that the reversal was happening. So that's where that is that's where that's coming from. And who knows? Again, we're not involved. We're not on the inner circle. But the two messages, at least from a public perception standpoint, makes it appear as though they're not on the same page. But like you said, that might not be the case.
Yeah.
I do want to ask about something that Democrats have been mentioning as something that they are concerned about with how things played out on Wednesday. A couple hours before the announcement, the president put out a message telling people that it was a good time to buy in the stock market. And then a few hours later, the stock market jumped 3,000 points once Trump announced his reversal, nearly 3,000 points. A lot of people got rich on Wednesday. I think that's clear to say. I mean, and it could be, we don't know who and everything, but Democrats are concerned that there may be people who knew, members of Congress, people on the outside, people in the administration. Nobody knows anything yet, but there's concern that this was market manipulation by the Trump administration, by the White House, and that there are some people who maybe knew about things and got rich as a result of it. David, do you have any concerns about that? And do you think that any kind of investigation would come if Democrats win the midterms and regain control of the House or the Senate?
Well, that's the key if Democrats regain control, because there won't be any investigations now. And by the way, Good luck trying to prove it. How are you going to prove it? I mean, other than a tweet. I mean, and just try to read into that. I mean, where's the paper trail? Where are the receipts? Sure. And you're not going to find that. So no, I don't think there's any political concern for Trump at all on this. From the outside, does it look to the naked eye, if you will, like he says that? And then all of a sudden that happens 4 hours later where he pauses that. Yeah, I mean, that looks fishy, if you will. And Democrats are going to try to capitalize on it, but I don't think it's going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of rich coming from the Democrats. I mean, I think Nancy Pelosi, Dianne Feinstein, all these people have sort of, been accused of profiting off of what they know. And so, I mean, again, I'm not sure any of those have convictions on any of this stuff. I don't think so, but it's where there's smoke, there's fire sort of a thing. So this to me I don't think it will have any legs just because this is one of those things, like David said. I mean, how are you proving that? It feels like sort of a narrative game to me.
Right. And probably both sides are in on that as well. So nobody wants to shine a light on
Right.
on on the other side there and open up a Pandora's box. I don't know where you guys. I'm 100% in favor of members of Congress not being able to trade stocks while they're in office. I mean, that's just. I would love to see that bill put on the floor tomorrow. And I don't know if it would pass because I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of money in the stocks. But last thing on this, and Dan, I want to start with you. China. China is not one of the countries that have seen that are getting the pause. In fact, the trade pressure on China is ramping up. We now have a 125% tariff on Chinese-made goods. They now have an 84% tariff on U.S.-made goods. Aside from the effect that this could have on prices on electronics and phones, and that's all very real and certainly will affect the American people's ability to consume and to buy things that are made in China. What's your level of concern over the current trade war with China and ways that they might react other than economically in order to kind of urge and push the United States to do something different? How will China react to all this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, but they have they're not a nation that's going to sit by and do nothing. I mean, that's something we know for sure. I mean, China's sitting out here buying up mineral rights and things like that around the country and around the world. And so they're very aggressive in trying to exert their influence on other countries, other nations on the globe. So they're certainly not going to sit by and do nothing. What they end up doing remains to be seen. I mean, like the primary concern is just the price of things. I mean, how many things do we see that say made in China? And the reason why they're made in China is because they're able to do it cheaper over there in other countries. And every time people look into, well, let's try to make something here in America. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is the unions here a lot of times make things so expensive and so almost impossible to compete with the prices that they don't do it. They end up finding another country to do it in. And China a lot of times is one of those countries. And so what the net result of that would just be, okay, well, then they won't do it here. And so do it in China. And then now if we put more on this, the prices of things are just going to go up. And even if you are forced to then make them back here, we can't do it cheaper because of the factors on the ground here. So the prices of things are just going to go up. So, it's definitely, it's definitely a concern. It's, I'm interested to hear what David has to say about maybe perhaps some of the longer term strategy at play here. But yeah, the short term result to me seems like could be potentially volatile for sure.
There's another side to this, Dan and John, on prices. There's a chance prices might not go up. Here's the philosophy on that, right? If you got a product that's made in China, you got a company that's doing that, and they've got 125% tax or tariff, same thing, right? Tariff that they've got to pay. Everybody thinks it's going to be pushed onto the consumer. Well, here's the problem with that. If you do that and you make an iPhone $700 more expensive or some sort of product more expensive, then less people will buy it. And if less people buy it, your stock value goes down inside the company. And so the company is faced with, well, do I eat that cost or do I pass it on to the consumer? So it's not so simple necessarily, because once again, if you pass it along to the consumer, you may have some problems as it relates to your stock valuation inside your company. So it's a little bit more complicated than just prices are going to go up. I think there's a calculation that companies are going to have to decide, and each one will make a different decision. As it relates to China around the world, well, look, I mean, I've believed all along that tariffs, while it's the main game in town right now, it's much bigger than that, right? I mean, Trump might try to get a TikTok deal out of it. There's, of course, the IT and the technology secrets that China is stealing from the United States on a daily basis. So that's going on. China's doing a whole lot of things. So I think Trump is trying to kind of reset not just the tariff imbalance, or the trade imbalance, excuse me, but many of the other things that are in play here, and trying to work out something that's, there are other avenues, there are other areas where there can be deals potentially made. And of course, the global considerations on all of this is, China is active everywhere, right? The South China Sea, as it relates to the Philippines and what's going on over there. You've got Greenland and the mineral rights issue, Dan, that you talked about. You've got the Panama Canal. I mean, everywhere you look, there's an expansionist view for China. And so Trump and the United States have their hands full with the CCP. And so this is not an easy fix. And that's why I've always put these this is into two buckets, right? It's like China, ... and the rest of the world. Two different buckets for sure.
One other item I wanted to talk about before we end, and that is an announcement, a couple of executive orders signed by the Trump administration this week, targeting two former government officials from his first term due to their past criticism of his actions. Two White House executive orders signed asking the Justice Department to take a closer look at Chris Krebs, who ran the president's cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency during the first Trump administration, as well as former senior Department of Homeland Security official Miles Taylor. Krebs was one of the people in the Trump administration who claimed the 2020 election was not rigged or stolen and testified to that effect before the January 6th committee. And Taylor authored a high-profile anonymous op-ed back in 2018 that was very critical of the Trump administration. Trump claims that Taylor should be tried for treason based off some of the things that he wrote and then later said. Dan, Democrats are calling this an authoritarian move by the president, that he's using the Justice Department to do nothing more than go after his political enemies. Does the president have the right to direct the DOJ to investigate political opponents who, at least at this point, do not appear to have committed a crime?
Well, I mean, again, this is sort of like the pot calling the kettle black here. I mean, this is essentially what Democrats did. I mean, they tried to put Trump into prison and, maybe not in a direct sort of way, but in a roundabout way, getting these, prosecutors, friendly prosecutors, et cetera, to kind of conjure up these charges against him. So again, this is kind of one of those where the starting point's a little rough for the Democrats, like, hey, what are you guys doing targeting a political opponent? Like, are you serious? Like we just came off of a whole summer before the election of watching you try to, yay, Trump's a felon, that was the whole narrative for them going on. But, look, the president doesn't have a right to weaponize the DOJ, but if there are legitimate reasons, and I hope that it's not flimsy evidence or just, suspect evidence, if there's actually something there, then fine, because I would like to see, I don't want to see this trend where we just start going after political opponents. Nobody wants a banana republic, but so I would hope that we would see that if this case, I hope it's not just like, hey, this guy irritated me and I'm annoyed at him for the disagreements before, so we're going to give him problems. I would hope that it's just, I'm not super familiar with the details of the case there that they're putting out here, but I would hope that there's some substance behind it. But again, like coming from the Democrats after what they just did, it's kind of, a tough one to swallow when you look at what just happened.
Well, here are a couple of details in that executive order. They're talking specifically as relates to Chris Krebs. They're saying that he was censoring election information. They're saying that there were First Amendment violations, and we don't need to get into all the specifics now as it relates to why they think that. But the point is that there is cause. When I say cause, the White House believes there is cause to look at this from a constitutional perspective. So there is that. Now, having said that, I agree with Dan. This is, what came first, the chicken or the egg? A lot of people, John, your question was kind of like, what about what the Trump administration is doing? Well, maybe we should have a conversation and a question before that, which is, what about what the Biden administration was doing? We could have a question before that. What was the Obama administration doing as it relates to Russia, and the last days of the Obama administration, when Trump said they were spying on my campaign, which everybody laughed at and turned out to be actually true. So they were spying on his campaign. That's been proven. That's now in the record book, if you will. It's been documented by special counsels. So look, this is a dangerous pattern. But if the record historically is going to reflect that Trump started it, that would be absolutely inaccurate. It was the Democrats who had TDS, who went after Trump with Trump derangement syndrome, and they decided to go after him. Now, they will justify, just like Trump is justifying now with Krebs, they will justify that, well, Trump had it coming. In other words, he broke the law, X, Y, and Z, did X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, if you're going to make that argument, well, that's what Trump's argument is against Krebs and Taylor and the way they see it. So look, this is tit for tat. But the tit and tat, what came first, right? And most people, if you just look at it objectively, will say that Trump is just basically doing and going after, yeah, sure, going maybe after some of his enemies. But what did the Democrats do? They went after Trump. So maybe that's not biblical, if you will. As a matter of fact, we know it's not, right? Turn the other cheek, look the other way, love your enemies. But the truth of the matter is, in politics, the Bible typically isn't coming into play as much. And that's where we're at.
Well, I think that's a good note to end this episode of Navigating Trump 2.0. Another busy week in the books. We will be back next week for a look at what happens in the future, these next 6-7 days or so in the Trump administration. David, Brody, Dan Andros, thanks for joining me once again.
Thanks,
All right, John.